Hi everyone. Today we're going to take a look at Chapter 3, which is entitled Educating Teachers for Developmentally Appropriate Practice. If I had to pick a theme that this chapter embodies, I would pick the word understanding. One of the best things that I really enjoyed throughout this work is the idea that you just have to really understand kids. You have to know and your business is kids. And regardless of if you have very little experience or if you have a lot of experience, the understanding of children is the overall theme to effective teaching. You can always change a lesson plan. You can always change a unit. You can go back and apologize to former students, like I often try and have to do as I continue on my doctoral program and learn so much. But the essence of developmental work lies in understanding. The authors of this text really hit home with this quote. I know many of you have experienced this throughout your careers. As a seasoned teacher, I get very curious, especially the older that I get. I tend to ask questions, go and talk with teachers, sit in on classrooms, because I'm very curious as to see what my kids are experiencing throughout the day. So to me it's very comical because I feel it's a double-edged sword. Over my years of teaching, I have worked and seen some amazing teaching that I only hope that I can be, that I can only hope to achieve one of these days. But on the other side of that sword is that I have seen things that embody this quote. Oh, you assigned the 8th crossword puzzle this week? And you've only written 21 referrals? Oh, 3 chapters of War and Peace you assigned today. Oh, to be read for tomorrow. For the 28 question multiple choice quiz. I bet kids are loving your class. We're going to take a look at where we can balance some of these ideas. Throughout this text, development can be explored in various levels. It can be explored through understanding the developmental perspective. It can be explored by the individual differences we all bring to the classroom. It can be explored by the interaction between development, knowledge, and learning and how they interact and overlap with each other. A social context, as well as acquiring a developmental expertise as teachers. Every teacher from all levels should start with having a developmental perspective. In short, this is the physical, social, interactive, emotional, cognitive, linguistic, and moral ethical development of our kids. In order for us to promote a pathway of healthy development and to make significant progress with our kids, we have to be very understanding of these foundational aspects of development. Rita Pierson, in her TED Talk entitled Every Kid Needs a Champion, I recommend everybody to watch it. In short, the message of that was kids don't learn from people that they don't think like them. So the idea of understanding kids, the idea of building relationships with kids all fall under this fundamental, this perspective that we build in our classroom culture that hit on these targeted areas. In terms of this perspective, there's 2 main forms that we can focus in on, the macro and the micro. And although I felt this to be kind of confusing in our text, I did the best that I could to try and synthesize it and communicate it all back to you. In terms of the macro, that's the general progression that children make in development. We know that these said developmental characteristics are going to happen within a child's life. This is very predictable. These are pathways that children will naturally progress through. Micro, though, however, is very specific to the child, and it's not necessarily a concrete prediction. It's a fluctuation of development. We just don't know what's going to happen. If the child were to respond like that, they may not. A sibling could respond in such developmental ways, but the child in question may not have that same developmental stance as even someone who's related to them. One of the things I thought was really key, though, in effective teaching that the text points out is that teachers need to understand the micro process and its correlation to macro's general pathways. So this impacts the way we interact with kids, the way we what we ask kids to do in performance, how we assess them. The macro definitely needs to be reflective of the micro and the micro to the macro. Another area of development relates to prior knowledge and experience. Piaget's work is referenced throughout this section in terms of his development of his stage theory and how we do things to put things into play for kids in order for them to understand concepts and skills that we want to communicate. I felt that there was one area of the text that's quoted here that I felt was very important and stood out to me. Children's abilities to think and reason have been shown to depend on the extent to which they are familiar with the content being reasoned about and have had a range of experiences upon which to draw. I know in personal experience, I know that I learn best when I can connect to something personally, and I'm sure this is probably generally said, or that macro mentality. But I know when I can connect to something that I know that it is sustainable, I know that it can be placed in my long-term memory, and I know that I can synthesize other materials with my connection, and if they're foreign or new to me. I'd like to say the same would be for kids as we go forward and we teach in our classrooms. We often do things as pre-setting or pre-reading or scaffolding activities that introduce kids to material in that same format. So how do we support this prior knowledge and include this in our classroom? Some main topics that I was able to pull out of this section was the idea of supporting relevancy to support the higher order thinking, or the HOT in my classroom. If I can be very relevant to my 8th graders using Twitter or something that would be on pop culture, I know that I am connecting with them not only on their level of familiarity, but then I'm able to construct bridges of understanding when we might be faced with other challenges like classical works, and they can make connections to what they know, to what they are going to be exposed to. Being in the zone, when we're in the zone of proximal development, we know that we are working on a level that's challenging to us, but it's not over challenging. As teachers, we have to account for individual differences, that idea of readiness and where our students are in terms of the spectrum of learning and where their zones are is definitely different for all of our kids based on experience and understanding. The idea of scaffolding is not a new concept to teachers, but it is definitely something very important to keep in mind as we scaffold the needs for all of our kids, regardless of where they are in the continuum of learning. Student interests, keeping student interests and keeping them engaged will definitely improve the idea of development. It'll improve student engagement. An engaged learner is a quality learner, in my opinion. The social emotional needs. I know that I can speak for my very hungry adolescents who seem to be hungry all the time, but I know especially my 4th hour class definitely needs food before we can get any type of learning today in for the day. And so after we eat, we know we can move on and we can focus in on the tasks at hand, which is our learning. And identity. Providing kids space and to express themselves, to construct meaning in their own ways, in their own forms, allowing them to fail and make mistakes and redo and ask questions in a safe environment all contributes to their understanding of themselves and who they shape themselves to be. The idea of cultural context, another aspect of development, breaks down into 2 main areas. The idea of what we typically might think as culture, and then there's this idea of school being a culture. According to the text, you'll see here there are many characteristics that culture includes. As teachers, it is essential for us to understand and incorporate and value where our kids come from. And not only to respect their beliefs and where they come from in terms of their cultural backgrounds, but to also be vehicles of or promoters of other cultural awarenesses. I know that I work in a very small rural country school. We don't have very much culture except for just white farming communities, and I try and do my best to kind of expose them to different thinkings, different people. I often have people come in and visit my classroom. I take point every year to get to know the kids in terms of who their families are. You know, I've worked very hard these past 6 years to understand the community that they're living in, understand connections. We explore through literature a lot of the characteristics that are labeled here under culture. In terms of school culture, I felt it was very interesting that the text talked and defined school culture as this idea of both teachers and students are this adaptive inhabitants. You know, we talked about the idea to be adaptive people in our introductory chapters. Definitely school culture is one to be adaptive, as it has greatly changed over the years. According to the text, it should be supportive of a healthy development for all that's involved and should revolve around consistency. I think we have a lot of work to do in terms of consistency with teacher ed preparation. I think we have a lot of work to do in our schools to make sure that's consistent. We're muddling through new standards. We're getting on board with standards-based grading. The idea of feedback is gaining popularity. Woo, thank goodness. But there's a lot to do to show consistency. With pre-service teachers, it's really important, I think, to foster this idea that thinking and acting developmentally need to go hand in hand. It's one thing to look at all of these areas and pieces to understand them and think about them, but it's another challenging means to move forward and keep all these in mind while acting on all of them. And to me, I think that takes a lot of time and skill. Even me as an 11th year teacher still struggles to incorporate year after year. It would definitely be something worth exploring in terms of refreshing or in the pre-service teachers aspect to dive heavily into, because again, the idea of supporting our kids through relationships, understanding our kids through these multiple lenses only lends itself to a strengthened, more positive learning environment. So I outlined some final thoughts and conclusions for this chapter. Going back to that idea of understanding is key no matter what role anyone has in education, from your administrator to your pre-service teacher to your veteran teacher. Understanding is necessary when working with kids. Every element constructed in a classroom should be strategically devised to meet the needs of all students. We shouldn't be weighing our kids down with these irrelevant tasks and that don't provide challenge or motivation. We should be packing our toolboxes, so to speak, with tools that kids can use as we unfold the standards within our classrooms. We should be able to understand the developmental pathways that positively impact students in terms of curriculum, instructional strategies, and classroom management. If we can understand this development, not only think about it, but act upon it, a lot of these things, such as the curriculum, strategies, and management, all fall into play, and they all work cohesively together. Lastly, students of all grade levels will successfully learn and grow. And at the end of the day, that's what we want for our kids.